What can I know? It's a massive anchoring question about human existence. When you just completely strip away all the daily noise, the hustle, the endless notifications, this is one of those absolute foundational questions we are left staring at.
And, well, once we figure out what we actually can know, it leads us directly to a second, equally heavy question. What ought I to do? Like, how do we use our agency and actually choose our actions in this crazy world?
Which naturally brings us to the ultimate human search for purpose. What may I hope for? Now, you might recognize these three infinitely deep questions. They were famously coined by the 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant. But here is the fascinating part. Long before Kant was even a thought, brilliant minds were answering these exact same questions, just in a completely different part of the world.
So, in this explainer, we're going to look at how a truly fascinating ancient doctrine called Srivaishnavism brilliantly answers Kant's universal questions. And it does this through a rich synthesis known as Ubhaya Vedanta. Think of it as this incredibly beautiful fusion of ancient Sanskrit and Tamil traditions. But before we unpack the heavy philosophy, let's briefly ground ourselves in the history. The roots of this tradition stretch way back to the ancient Sanskrit texts of the Vedas, alongside the Tamil revelations composed by 12 saints, who are known as the Alwars. The whole tradition got a major revival in the 9th century CE by a figure named Nathamuni. But it was really in the 11th century that the core philosophy, called Vishistadvaita, or qualified monism, was structurally cemented by the great theologian Ramanuja. Okay, here is our roadmap for today. Number 1. The nature of reality. Number 2, the path to salvation. Number 3, the ultimate goal. And number 4, living a life of surrender. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. The nature of reality, or tattva, answering the question, what can I know?
So, the philosopher Yamunacharya really neatly categorized literally all of existence into tattvatraya, or the threefold reality. It's kind of like a giant cosmic puzzle with three main pieces. First up, you have Ishwara, the Supreme Being, who is the only truly independent ruler. Then you have Chaitana, the sentient beings. That's us. We're souls with consciousness, but importantly, we are entirely dependent. And finally, Achaitana, the non-sentient matter making up the created universe, which is also dependent. So the main takeaway here? God alone is completely independent. Every single other thing relies entirely on him.
Okay, so who exactly is this independent ruler? Well, the texts describe the Supreme Being as possessing Nitya Kalyana Gunas. That means inherent, limitless, and eternal auspicious qualities. Ramanuja actually paints this absolutely beautiful imagery, comparing God to a vast ocean into which rivers of boundless virtues just constantly flow. So we aren't just talking about supreme knowledge or mighty power here. We are talking about a being that is friendly, equally disposed to all, and fiercely protective of devotees with what the texts literally call limitless sweetness.
And all of this builds into an incredibly intimate relationship between us and the divine, known as Sharira Shariri Bhava, which basically translates to the body-soul relationship. Try to think of the entire universe as the cosmic body of God. There are 3 steps to this connection. First, Ajatyatha, meaning the soul is supported by God. Second, Niyamyatha, the soul is controlled by God's will. And third, Sashatva, the soul exists for the pleasure of God. But wait, here's the really fascinating nuance. We actually still exercise free will. We initiate an action, but it ultimately requires God's cooperative permission to actually take place.
Moving on to Section 2, the path to salvation, or Heta Jatsya, answering the question, what ought I to do? So the ancient texts essentially sanction 2 distinct paths. On the left side, we have Bhakti, or devotional service. Now this involves rigorous disciplines, super strict rules, and immense, unwavering patience. Frankly, if you make even a tiny mistake, the whole exercise kind of collapses. It is incredibly, incredibly difficult. But then on the right side, you have prapathi, which is loving self-surrender. It is a much more direct means. It's quicker, it's easier, and wonderfully, it is available to absolutely everyone without restriction. It is specifically designed for those of us who feel completely helpless to undertake the intense rigors of bhakti.
I mean, just listen to this incredibly striking quote from the followers of Vedanta Desika's school. They liken the rigorous path of bhakti to a bridge of hair built upon a river of fire. Let that vivid imagery sink in for just a second. A bridge of hair over a river of fire. It beautifully and honestly kind of terrifyingly illustrates the extreme fragility of trying to earn salvation strictly through your own disciplined effort. It's almost impossible.
And that brings us to a frankly brilliant paradox at the very heart of prapathi. It's called akinchanya, which essentially means utter helplessness. When historical titans of this tradition completely surrendered to God, it was precisely because they realized they totally lacked the qualifications to cross that bridge of hair. According to the texts, that sincere realization of your own utter helplessness, that actually becomes your exact qualification to receive divine grace.
Which brings us to section 3, the ultimate goal, or purushartha, answering our final question. What may I hope for?
You see, in many traditions, salvation is viewed as just an escape from the endless cycle of suffering. But in Srivaishnavism, it is much, much more active. The ultimate goal here is nitya kainkaryam, meaning eternal loving service. So it's not just about what you're freed from, but what you are freed for. It's all about returning the soul to an active, blissful state of eternal service to the divine.
And finally, section 4, living a life of surrender. Let's look at the behavioral traits of a prapana.
Now there are 5 specific behavioral components, or angas, expected of a surrendered soul. First, you commit to acts that please the Lord, and obviously you avoid acts that displease Him. You actively practice karpanya, which is that deep confession of total helplessness we just talked about. You also maintain mahavishwasa, an absolute, totally carefree faith in God's grace that literally eliminates your worry about the future. And finally, you offer a heartfelt, repeated plea for protection, because, as the texts clearly note, divine protection must be actively and repeatedly sought out.
Actually living this out day to day requires a massive psychological shift through 3 acts of true surrender. Step 1, you hand back ownership of your soul to God, realizing, hey, you were never truly independent anyway. Step 2, you place the entire burden of your protection squarely on the divine. And step 3, you surrender the fruits, or the results of all your endeavors. Basically, you completely give up the illusion of control and just let go of all that anxiety over the outcome.
Now you might be thinking, this internal state of total surrender means isolating yourself from the rest of the world, right? Well, it's actually the exact opposite. Because a surrendered soul feels completely protected and openly acknowledges their own profound helplessness, they naturally develop a deep, deep empathy for others. They actively engage with society to bring solace, comfort, and support to people, helping them along their own difficult journeys. That deep internal faith manifests directly as powerful outward compassion.
So, we've explored how ancient texts answered Kant's greatest questions through the architecture of reality, the path of surrender, and the hope of eternal service. But it all hinges on a concept that runs entirely counter to our modern instincts. So I leave you with this. In a world absolutely obsessed with self-reliance, hustle culture, and total independence, could realizing your own helplessness actually be your greatest strength? Thanks so much for exploring this with us. Keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.